And moving on now, Canada has defended its call for the release of jailed activists in Saudi Arabia following a decision by Riyadh to expel the Canadian ambassador. Over to the call.
Let me be very clear with everyone here and with the Canadians who may be watching and listening. Canada will always stand up for human rights in Canada and around the world, and women's rights are human rights.
The Canadian Foreign Minister said speaking out for human rights is an essential value that defines her country. Freeland added that Ottawa is waiting for Riyadh to clarify its stance on future relations with Canada. She said Saudi Arabia has to explain why the dispute between Ottawa and Riyadh escalated so quickly. Meanwhile, a prominent rights group, Amnesty International, has called on the world community to support Canada in the row and form a united front against Saudi Arabia.
It is important to speak out, and clearly, the aggressive response from the Saudi government shows that they are well aware that they have serious human rights problems.
Paul said drawing attention to unjust imprisonments increased pressure on governments. Earlier, Saudi Arabia recalled its ambassador to Ottawa and gave the Canadian envoy 24 hours to leave the kingdom. This decision came after Canada urged Saudi Arabia to immediately release 2 female activists from jail. Saudi Arabia described Canada's demand as interference in its internal affairs. The kingdom also froze new trade and investment with Canada and announced that it would suspend flights to and from Toronto. For more on that, we are joined by Mr. Gordon Duff from Ohio, joining us live, senior editor of Veterans Today. Thank you very much, Mr. Duff, once again for joining us on Press TV. Now, I would like to know, what is your take on this situation regarding the issue of human rights? Well, it seems that Western countries are quite selective when it comes to the issue of human rights. In some cases, it seems such an extreme issue for which they're willing to break up diplomatic relations with a country such as Saudi Arabia. And on the other hand, we see very strong ties with the exact same country that has absolutely no regard for human rights.
Well, when you're looking at bin Salman, you're seeing a very weak leader, a very confused young man who's taken the lead from watching Donald Trump. Donald Trump has had poor and even despicable relations with women. Women's rights in the U.S. are falling by the wayside quickly. Bin Salman apparently likes to see women driving cars and felt that that was his lip service to equality. He's picked up a style of leadership of simply letting his mouth get into gear, acting irresponsibly. By demanding that the Canadian ambassador leave the country within 24 hours in normal diplomatic circumstances, that is a prelude to war. It's a prelude to an attack. It's relatively insane. The Canadians had a very clear position here. Saudi Arabia has a position on the United Nations Human Rights Council. The United States had left the Human Rights Council. Israel has left. Saudi Arabia stayed, and if you stay, you're a signatory. If you're a signatory, you're claiming that you are bound by its rules. Canada demanded that they stay bound by the rules. Saudi Arabia has refused. They've been called out. Now, what this could and should lead to for the United Nations in normal circumstances is sanctions, broad sanctions against the sale of military hardware, not just by Canada, but by Britain certainly, who is now Canada's closest ally, since the United States and Canada are no longer speaking, and eventually the United States. The continuing need to kowtow to Saudi Arabia, to arm Saudi Arabia for war, to allow them to imprison, and simply some of these activists have been disappeared. We have no idea where they are. They're alive. to torture openly. And we have no idea who Saudi Arabia is executing. But bin Salman is gone wild on a killing spree of not just criminals or what they declare criminals, since they have no form of due process, but activists as well are disappearing, and we believe being executed in a wholesale manner by the new Saudi crown prince. Now, Saudi Arabia needs to apologize to Canada, needs to redress, it needs to come into line with the tenets of United Nations membership and the United Nations tenets on human rights and certainly women's rights. And we applaud Canada for, of all nations, putting its money where its mouth is. We're going to wait to see how Britain follows suit, how the EU follows suit. We know the United States is going to do nothing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gordon Duff, joining us live from Ohio, senior editor of Veterans Today. Your comments are always welcome on Press TV, sir.